start, I want you to know something. A small town in the Ozarks. Everybody talks, constantly. Who's dating whom? Who got fired? Whose kid got caught drinking behind the Dollar General? Nothing stays private for long in a town of 1,200 people. That's just how it works. So when a whole town goes quiet about something, what happens? When you ask a simple question and every single person in that town looks away, changes the subject, and suddenly remembers somewhere else they need to be. If you want more stories that will keep you up at night, subscribe to Red State Horror on YouTube for new stories every week. The Red State Horror presents The Town That Doesn't Talk, Hensley, Missouri, Ozark Mountains, 1983. Present. A story about the kind of small town where everybody knows everybody, and everybody keeps the same secret. That's not privacy. That's a secret. And Hensley, Missouri, has been keeping theirs for over 40 years. Here, we divided the story into 6 simple parts. Let's begin from Chapter 0, a town you've never heard of. Hensley sits in Ozark County, Missouri, about 30 miles south of West Plains. It's the kind of town that exists between other towns. A post office, a Casey's General Store, a volunteer fire department, 2 churches that have been competing for the same congregation since 1952, and a diner called Patsy's that has served the same menu since the Carter administration. The mountains around Hensley are beautiful if you're into that sort of thing. Rolling limestone ridges covered in cedar and white oak. The North Fork of the White River runs cold and clear 8 miles to the east. In the fall, the color is genuinely stunning. Tourists drive through and take pictures, buy local honey from a roadside stand and think, what a charming little place, and then they leave. Nobody moves to Hensley. You're either from there or you're passing through. The people who are from there are friendly. Genuinely friendly, the kind that means it. They'll wave from their trucks. They'll bring you a casserole when someone dies. They'll help you pull your car out of a ditch at 10 p.m. without being asked. That part is real. But there is one thing they will not talk about. Ask anyone in Hensley about the Carver family, and watch what happens to their face. Go ahead. Ask. I need to explain something before we get into the Carvers, because without this context, the story doesn't make complete sense. Hensley is an isolated town, not just geographically, though it is geographically isolated, the kind of place where the nearest hospital is 45 minutes away and the nearest Walmart is an hour. It's isolated in the way old Ozark communities sometimes are, where families have been intermarried for 5 or 6 generations, where the social fabric goes so deep that an outsider can live there for 20 years and still feel like a guest. What that means, practically, is that when the town decides something is no one else's business, they mean it. And they're very, very good at enforcing that. A reporter from the Springfield News Leader came to Hensley in 2009 to write a feature about the town's history. She was there for 2 days. She interviewed 14 people. Not one of them mentioned the Carver family. Not one of them mentioned 1983. She published a lovely piece about the honey stand, the diner, and the rivalry between the 2 churches. She had no idea what she'd missed. I know what she missed because of a man named Duane who grew up in Hensley, moved to Springfield in 1991, and has spent the 30 years since then trying to decide whether to talk about it. Last year, he decided to talk about it. Chapter 1. The Carvers. Here's the first thing you need to know about the Carver family. They were the most normal people in town. Not the most popular. Not the wealthiest. Not the most anything. Just normal. Completely, unremarkably, boringly normal. And that's what makes what happened so hard to process, even now. The Carvers, Ray, Linda, and their 3 kids, lived at the end of Gravel Creek Road, about 2 miles outside the Hensley town limits. Ray worked at the mill in Willow Springs. Linda did bookkeeping for 2 local businesses from home. Their oldest, Danny, was 17. Middle kid, Shelley, was 14. Little one, Marcus, was 9. Duane was Danny's best friend. They'd been close since 3rd grade. The kind of friendship where you spend more nights at each other's houses than your own. Duane knew the Carver place as well as he knew his own. He knew which porch step squeaked. He knew Ray Carver took his coffee black and watched the news at 6 and went to bed at 9:30 without fail. He knew Linda Carver kept a spare key under the ceramic frog by the back door. He knew all of that, which is why, on the morning of September 14th, 1983, when he rode his bike out to the Carver place and found it empty, he didn't understand what he was seeing. Not abandoned and empty. Not moved out empty-handed. Just empty in the way a house is empty when the people who live there have stepped out briefly and will be right back. Ray's truck is in the driveway. Linda's station wagon in the driveway. Dishes in the drying rack. Coffee cup on the kitchen counter, half full. The TV is on in the living room. A basket of laundry on the couch, half folded. Nobody was there. Duane was 16. He stood in the Carver driveway for a few minutes, figured they'd gone for a walk or something. and rode home. He came back the next morning. The truck and station wagon were still in the driveway. The coffee cup was still on the counter. The laundry was still on the couch. The half-folded laundry had been sitting there for 2 days without anyone touching it. That's when he told his parents. The Ozark County Sheriff's Office received the missing persons report on September 16, 1983. Deputy Harold Briggs drove out to the Carver property and found exactly what Duane had described. The house was unlocked. Vehicles were present. There was food in the refrigerator. The family dog, a beagle named Chester, was in the backyard, fed and watered, which Briggs initially found confusing. Someone had fed the dog after the family disappeared. No one ever figured out who. Briggs filed his report. Investigators from the county and then from the state came and went. They found no signs of violence, no blood, no forced entry. There was no indication that the family had packed anything. Their clothes were in the closets, their toothbrushes were in the bathroom, and their wallets and purses were on the kitchen table. Ray Carver's wallet had $83 in it. 5 people, with their truck, their car, their dog fed, their laundry half folded, and their coffee half drunk. Gone. Here's the thing that Duane told me that's never been in any official record anywhere. When he went back to the Carver house that second morning, before he told his parents, before anyone called the sheriff, he went inside. The back door was unlocked, as always. He went in through the kitchen, and on the kitchen floor, in the middle of the room, was a single muddy footprint. Not a boot print, not a shoe, a barefoot, adult-sized, wide, pressing deep into the linoleum as if whoever left it was carrying a lot of weight. One print, just one, pointing toward the back door. Duane stared at it for a long time, and then he left, and never told anyone about it. Not the investigators, not his parents, not anyone until he told me. I was 16, he said, and I was scared. And I think some part of me understood, even then, that telling people about that footprint wasn't going to help find the Carvers. It was just going to bring whatever made that print more attention than it wanted. He paused when he said that. Then he said, "I'm still not sure I made the wrong call. If you want more stories that will keep you up at night, subscribe to Red State Horror on YouTube for new stories every week." Chapter 2. What the Town Did Next. This is where the story gets strange, not the disappearance. As awful as that is, families go missing. It happens. The investigation runs its course, the case goes cold, and the family is eventually presumed dead. That's a tragedy, but it's a tragedy with a shape you recognize. What Hensley did after the Carvers disappeared, that's the part that doesn't have a shape you recognize. Within a week of the disappearance, the town of Hensley had an unspoken agreement about what had happened to the Carver family. Not an explanation, not a theory, an agreement. The agreement was this. The Carvers left. They packed up in the night, and they left. And they didn't say goodbye to anyone because that's the kind of people they apparently were. And that was that. Nothing more to discuss. Duane watched this happen in real time and could not understand it. He had been in Danny Carver's bedroom 2 days before the disappearance. Danny's guitar was still on its stand in the corner. His baseball cards were in their binders on the shelf. His letter jacket was on the hook on the back of the door. You don't leave your letter jacket if you're leaving voluntarily. You just don't. But when Duane tried to say this to his parents, his mother got a look on her face that he'd never seen before. Tight, closed, not angry exactly. More like careful. "Some things are better left alone, Duane," she said. And then she went back to washing the dishes and did not speak about it again. He heard that exact phrase, "Some things are better left alone," 4 more times in the next 2 weeks. From his father, from his school principal, from his pastor, from Harold Briggs, the deputy who had taken the initial report, when Duane ran into him at Casey's and asked if there were any updates. Some things are better left alone. It was like the town had agreed on the script. The Carver house sat empty for a year. Then it was quietly sold. Duane never found out to whom, because the transaction didn't appear in the county property records he found years later, which shouldn't be possible, but apparently was. A family from out of town moved in, stayed 8 months, and left without explanation. Another family after that lasted 6 months. By the late 1980s, the house had been empty for 2 years and was starting to fall apart. In 1991, a month before Duane left Hensley for good, somebody burned it down. The volunteer fire department responded. They put out the blaze. The fire marshal from West Plains came and looked at the ruins and filed a report that Duane later obtained through a public records request. The cause of the fire was listed as undetermined. No further investigation was conducted. "Undetermined," Duane said to me. "A house burns down in a town of 1,200 people, and the investigation consists of one guy looking at the ashes and writing undetermined. In a town where everybody knows everybody. In a town where somebody would have seen something. Nobody saw anything. He looked at me. Or everybody saw something, and nobody was going to say so. Chapter 3. The night Duane heard the meeting. I want to be clear about something. When Duane Pirot talks about Hensley, he doesn't talk like a crazy person. He's a 57-year-old man who works in insurance and coaches his granddaughter's soccer team. He speaks carefully. He qualifies things. He says, I think, and it seemed like, and I could be wrong about this. He is not the kind of person who sees conspiracies everywhere. If you want more stories that will keep you up at night, subscribe to Red State Horror on YouTube for new stories every week. But there is one night he comes back to, over and over, that he cannot explain away no matter how carefully he qualifies it. The night he was 17 and couldn't sleep, he walked out to his back porch at 2 a.m. and heard the sounds coming from the ridge. It was October 1983, about a month after the Carvers disappeared. Duane's house was on the eastern edge of Hensley, backing up against a cedar ridge that rose steeply behind the yard. There was a logging road that went up the ridge, an old one, hadn't been used in years, barely a track through the trees. He heard voices, not loud, not close, the kind of sound that carries through still night air in the mountains, a murmur, collective, from more than a few people. Coming from up on the ridge, up the logging road, maybe a quarter-mile up. He stood on the porch and listened for a while. He thought at first it was maybe some teenagers up there, drinking. Then he thought it was too many voices for that and too organized, and there was no music, no laughing, none of the sounds that go with teenagers drinking. What he heard, and he says this slowly because he knows how it sounds, was a meeting. A large group of people, up on a ridge in the middle of the night in October, having what sounded like a structured meeting. People are taking turns talking, something that might have been a response, like a congregation responding to a pastor. A rhythm to it. He went inside and woke up his father. His father came to the back porch, stood there, and listened for about 30 seconds. Go back to bed, his father said. What is that? Duane asked. His father looked at him for a moment, that same careful, closed look his mother had given him, and said for the third time in Duane's life to that point, some things are better left alone. Then he went inside and locked the back door, which he had never done before. Duane didn't go back to sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed and listened. The sounds from the ridge went on for about an hour. Then they stopped, all at once, like someone had turned off a switch. No gradual trailing off. No sounds of people leaving. No footsteps on the logging road coming back down. Just silence. He never heard it again. He moved to Springfield 8 months later. He has not spent a night in Hensley since. I don't know what they were doing up there, he told me. I've thought about it for 40 years, and I genuinely don't know. But I'll tell you this much. The list of things 100 people do in secret on a ridge at 2 a.m. in October, the month after a family vanishes, is not long. And none of the things on that list are good. If you want more stories that will keep you up at night, subscribe to Red State Horror on YouTube for new stories every week. Chapter 4. The 911 call nobody was supposed to make. Duane is not the only person who has tried to pull this thread. In 2004, a woman named Carla Hutchins moved to Hensley with her husband after he got a job at the quarry in Thayer. She was an outsider, which in Hensley means you're an outsider until you're not, which takes about 20 years. She was friendly, she was social, she made the effort. But she kept bumping into the same wall that every outsider bumps into in Hensley eventually. She started asking about the Carvers by accident. She didn't even know that's what she was doing. She found a child's shoe at the back of a closet in her rental house, small, worn at the toe. She asked her neighbor, a woman named Beverly Marsh who had lived in Hensley her whole life, whose house she was renting, and whether there was a way to return the shoe to whoever had left it. Beverly's face just closed, Carla told me, like a door shutting. She took the shoe from me and said she'd take care of it, and changed the subject so fast I barely registered it. I went home and thought about it and realized I didn't even know the address of the house I was renting. So I looked it up, and that's when I found the Carver name in some old county records online. Carla spent 3 weeks reading everything she could find about the Carver disappearance, which wasn't much. A couple of old newspaper articles, the missing persons records, and a listing in a national missing persons database that had never been updated. Then she started asking around town. Within 48 hours of starting to ask around, her husband was called into his supervisor's office and told very politely, very professionally, that the quarry was cutting back and his position was being eliminated. He had been there for 7 months. Maybe it was a coincidence, Carla said. She said it in the tone of someone who does not believe it was a coincidence. They moved out of Hensley the following month. But before they left, something happened that Carla has never fully processed. She was alone in the house on a Tuesday afternoon. Her husband was at the quarry wrapping up his last few days. She heard something in the backyard. A sound she described as not quite an animal, not quite a person, something in between. She went to the back window and looked out. There was a figure at the back fence, standing at the property line, just outside the yard, half in the tree line, not doing anything, just standing there looking at the house. She called 911. Ozark County Sheriff's Dispatch, November 9th, 2004, 3:14 p.m. Dispatch, Ozark County. What's your emergency? Carla. Hi. Yes, I have someone standing at my back fence. They've been there for about 10 minutes just looking at the house. It's making me uncomfortable. Dispatch. Can you describe the person? Carla. An adult. I think male. Wearing dark clothes. I can't see the face clearly. They're partly in the trees. They're just standing there. They haven't moved. Dispatch. What's your address, ma'am? Carla gives address on Gravel Creek Road. Dispatch. Pause that address. Okay. And you said they're at the back fence? Carla. Yes. Just standing there. Is there a deputy who can... Dispatch. Ma'am, I'm going to send someone out. While we wait, I just want to ask, are you planning on staying in Hensley long term, or is this more of a temporary situation? Carla. Pause. I'm sorry, what? Dispatch. I just ask because sometimes with the rentals out that way, people come and go, and I want to make sure the deputy has the right context for. Carla. Someone is standing at my fence, and you're asking if I'm planning to stay here long term. Dispatch. Pause. I'm sorry, ma'am. A deputy is on his way. A deputy arrived 22 minutes later. By the time he got there, the figure at the fence was gone. The deputy walked the tree line, found nothing, and wrote up the call as a report of a suspicious person with no subject located. Standard stuff. Except for one thing. The deputy who responded was Harold Briggs. The same Harold Briggs who had taken the original Carver missing persons report in 1983. He would have been in his late 50s by 2004. He walked the tree line, he looked around, and then he came to Carla's back door and knocked. He was perfectly nice, Carla said. Very professional. He took my statement, and then at the end, before he left, he said something I've thought about every single day since. He said, Mrs. Hutchins, I know this is an uncomfortable question, but have you and your husband given any thought to relocating? Ozark County is a wonderful place, but it's not for everyone. She asked him why he was asking that. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said he was just making conversation, touched the brim of his hat, and left. He wasn't making conversation, Carla said. He was warning me. And I wasn't smart enough to understand it until 3 days later when my husband came home and told me he'd been let go. Chapter 5. The Researcher Who Got Too Close. Duane and Carla are not the only ones. Over the years, I found 4 other people who had tried in various ways to understand what happened to the Carver family and what Hensley has been hiding about it. Every single one of them hit the same wall. Every single one of them eventually stopped asking. 3 of them wouldn't speak to me on the record. They were willing to talk, but only if I didn't use their names. The 4th one is a man named Gary Trimble, and he'll use his name because, he says, he's old enough now that he doesn't care who knows he's talking. Gary Trimble was a history professor at Missouri State in Springfield for 23 years. He's retired now, living in Branson, spending his time fishing and annoying his former colleagues with very long emails. He is 71 years old, and he has been thinking about Hensley since 1987, when he was a young academic writing a book about isolated Ozark communities and their relationship to outside authority. He visited Hensley as part of his research. He stayed for a week, talked to a lot of people, and took a lot of notes. He found the community fascinating. The insularity, the self-sufficiency, the way the social structure had remained essentially unchanged for several generations. He wrote a chapter about it in his book. He did not know about the Carvers then. That came later. In 1994, a former Hensley resident named Paul Wick reached out to him after reading the chapter. Paul had grown up in Hensley and left in 1988. He wanted to talk about things that hadn't made it into the chapter. Paul Wick told Gary about the Carvers. He also told him about the Ridge, about the meetings on the Ridge that people in town talked about. They talked about them in the same way they talked about the weather, as a fact of life, as a thing that just was, not a thing that required explanation or examination. He told Gary that in Hensley there were 2 kinds of people, the ones who went to the Ridge and the ones who knew not to ask about the Ridge. And everyone in town falls into one of those 2 categories? Gary asked. Everyone, Paul Wick said. From birth, basically. Gary Trimble spent the next 2 years trying to find out what happened on that ridge. He made trips to Hensley. He filed records requests. He talked to former residents. He built a picture, piece by piece, that he found increasingly difficult to process. What he believes, and he is careful to say he cannot prove this, cannot prove any of this, is that Hensley has maintained for somewhere between 60 and 100 years a community agreement that operates outside normal civic and legal structures. A set of shared rules, shared obligations, and shared secrets that are passed down through families the way other things are passed down. Quietly, completely, with the expectation that they will be honored without question. He believes the Carvers violated one of those rules. He does not know which one. There are towns like this in the Ozarks, Gary said. Not many, but they exist. Communities that closed off from the outside world far enough back that they developed their own internal governance, their own ways of handling things. And for the most part, it's harmless. They just want to be left alone. But sometimes... He stopped. Started again. Sometimes the thing they're protecting, the reason for the secrecy, is not something you want to know about. And by the time you figure out that's the case, you've already asked too many questions. I asked him what he meant by too many questions. He smiled, not happily. My car was broken into twice during my research trips to Hensley. Both times, nothing was taken. Not my laptop, not my wallet, not my camera. The only thing missing, both times, was my notebook. Just the notebook with my Hensley notes. He shrugged. After the second time, I decided to write about something else. He leaned back in his chair. That was 1996. I still think about it. I think about the Carvers all the time. 5 people, $83 in the wallet on the kitchen table, a dog someone kept feeding, and an entire town that decided, before the body was even cold, before we even knew if there was a body, that the story was already over. If you want more stories that will keep you up at night, subscribe to Red State Horror on YouTube for new stories every week. Chapter 6. What's still happening? Here's what makes this different from a standard cold case. Cold cases are frozen. They happened, they weren't solved, and now they exist in the past as an open wound. What's happening in Hensley isn't frozen. It's ongoing. The meetings on the ridge are still happening. People who move to Hensley and ask the wrong questions still get pushed out. The wall is still up. I know this because I went to Hensley. I drove down in March, a Tuesday, gray and cold. The Ozark ridge is still brown and bare, the cedar's the only green thing for miles. I stopped at Patsy's Diner and had coffee and the daily special, beef stew, good enough that, under other circumstances, I would have just enjoyed it and moved on. I talked to people. I was careful about it. I didn't lead with the Carvers. I asked about the history of the town, about the families that had been there longest, about what had changed and what hadn't. Standard opener. Friendly. I was just a person passing through who found the town charming. After about an hour at the diner, I mentioned, as casually as I could, that I'd read something somewhere about a family that had gone missing from the area in the 80s. The woman behind the counter, in her late 60s, who had been there when I arrived and would presumably be there when I left, looked at me with an expression I cannot fully describe. It wasn't hostile. I wasn't nervous. It was something older than either of those things. Patient. Assessing. She said people come and people go. That's always been true out here. I said the name Carver. She refilled my coffee without a word and went to the other end of the counter. I tried 2 more people. One of them, a man in his 70s eating pie at the counter, simply got up, left $3 on the counter for a $6 piece of pie, and walked out. The other one, a younger woman who seemed genuinely friendly and had been chatting with me for 15 minutes, looked at me with something that might have been pity, and said, very quietly, "You should probably get back on the road." Not a threat. Not unfriendly. The same careful tone Duane's father had used 40 years ago. The same words Harold Briggs had used with Carla. Concern. With an edge. I got back on the road. There is one more thing. Before I left Hensley, I drove out to Gravel Creek Road. The Carver house is long gone. Burned in 1991. The lot now overgrown. A tangle of cedar scrub and old fieldstone that used to be a foundation. There's a newer house across the road. And next to where the Carver house used to be, barely visible through the scrub, is a fence post. Just one fence post, standing alone. The fence itself long since rotted away. Someone has tied a faded yellow ribbon around it. I sat in my car and looked at it for a while. I don't know who tied that ribbon. I don't know when. I don't know if it's been replaced over the years, or if it's been there since 1983. I don't know if it's a memorial or a marker or something else entirely. What I know is that in a town that has officially decided the Carvers left of their own accord, and there's nothing more to discuss, in that town, someone went out to the place where their house used to be and tied a yellow ribbon to a post and left it there. Maybe that means someone in Hensley knows something they haven't been able to say out loud for 40 years. Maybe that ribbon is as close as they can get to telling the truth. Or maybe I'm reading too much into a piece of fabric on a post in a field. Maybe, but I don't think so. And you don't think so either. That's why you're still watching. Chapter 0. Before you go. The Carver family. Ray, Linda, Danny, Shelley, and 9-year-old Marcus is still listed as missing persons in the Missouri State Database. The case has never been officially closed. There are no suspects. There are no persons of interest. There is, as far as the state of Missouri is concerned, no explanation. The people of Hensley, Missouri know exactly where they stand on that. They've known for 40 years, and they are extraordinarily good at not saying so. I'm going to keep looking into this. If you have any connection to Hensley, if you grew up there, if you know someone who did, if you've heard anything about the Carver family or about what happens on that ridge, my contact is in the description. No judgment. Complete privacy if that's what you need. I mean that. And if you're from Hensley and you're watching this right now, you know what happened to that family. You've always known. Some things are better left alone. That's what they told you. And maybe they were right. Maybe there are things out here that are better not spoken. But 5 people are still missing. Marcus was 9 years old. Somebody should say something. Subscribe to Red State Horror. Next week we're going deeper into the Ozarks. The road gets darker from here.